Chapter 29. I will take that as further evidence that God doesn't exist, said Ray. Perdita dangled an empty blister pack between her thumb and forefinger and winced. I'm so sorry. It was my last one. If I'd known you were out of Visalgia, I'd have saved it for you. I wasn't even that hungover. She dropped the pack in Ray's kitchen bin, which was so full that it just bounced off the heap of overflowing rubbish and fell onto the floor. Perdita picked it up and stuffed it firmly back, upsetting the delicately balanced stack of waste, which spilled over in an avalanche around her feet. Just leave it, Ray groaned. I'll sort it out later. Perdita had talked her way into staying at Ray's after they'd been out together. Without a reliable safe house to hide from corporate security, it had been the best option for a night's sleep. And it also provided an opportunity to build more of a rapport with the Panmotech. One more metastasis session today, and she'd have the offshore negatives encrypted in the simulation and the minds of the cluster. A close tie with this Panmotech was essential. Perdita couldn't have asked for better. Ray was an easy mark. So jaded, so cynical. A true misanthrope. Seemed like her only friends were TV characters. And people with holes in their lives were always so keen to fill them. It was like pushing on an open door. You didn't seem that bad last night, you know, Perdita consoled her. I'm surprised. Ray squinted at her. Didn't seem that bad? Really? She closed her eyes and shook her head. She'd behaved like an utter twat, and she knew it. Perdita was just being polite. Mixing her drink was always a bad idea. When would she learn? And what was it she'd ranted on about? TV, of course. Good God. She'd banged on about the genius of big gay billionaires for ages. And actually got angry about the last season of Grandfather Swap. Really angry. Oh, Christ. We'll be off to inflorescence soon, said Perdita. You can ask someone in the cluster. They might have some Visalgia. Perdita was keen for their metastasis session to begin on schedule. Early, if possible. She needed to get the job done. Ray moaned again. The idea of begging a hangover remedy of those donuts was unthinkable. She'd be forced to engage in the kind of drinking banter she'd heard 1,000 times before, and she'd have to be nice to them. Honestly, I'd rather staple my eyelids to my arsehole. Just a suggestion. Listen, it's another 10 minutes before we need to leave. I feel like shit. I'm just going to kick back and watch the rest of Ninja Bachelorette, if you don't mind. Sure, don't let me disturb you. Perdita smiled and did her best to look non-judgmental. While Ray zoned out and watched TV, the recusant agent checked her eyeline and was surprised to see a message from Russell, her talkative colleague at the call centre, the one who'd told her about the metastasis sessions at Inflorescence. A recorded hologram of his head shone up from her wrist, his face a picture of melodramatic concern, his lips pouting with the scandal of it all. Well, heaven knows what you've been up to, my dear. I ought not to ask, but he lowered his voice and leered at the camera. There's been a man here looking for you. Big, strong, moody type, says he's with security. Asking all sorts of questions, he was very demanding. When did we last see you? What were you doing on this day? What were you doing on that day? Ever so nosy he was. He looked away, a little repulsed. I wasn't taken with him myself. Appalling manners, not my type. Strong, though. Very strong. If you like that kind of thing, which I don't. Not usually, not really me. Anyway, I said nothing about our you-know-what sessions. Model of integrity, as ever. Thought you'd like to know. Give me a bell if you want to talk. His eyes glowed with mischief. You dark horse, you. Can't wait to catch up. Perdita checked the time. It wasn't long until their session. She considered bailing. This was getting too hot. Security was closing in on her. She should make a break for it now, before it was too late. Was it safe to go to inflorescence at all? Keep your eyes on the prize, she told herself. Just a few hours. A thought occurred to her, and with a flurry of finger taps, she started programming her eyeline for a new contingency. Dropping into metastasis was, for a change, a genuine relief. The hangover was gone, and standing at the rails of the simulated cruise liner, looking over the ocean, Ray savoured the fresh sea air. Holding the rail with both hands, she looked down the side of the ship. Way below, bobbing merrily in the ship's wake, was a small tugboat. Tucked up neatly to the beam, the little tug was coupled to the cruiser by a long, thick, hose-like cable. It looked like the ship was being refuelled, or, considering Perdita's pregnancy, Ray thought, perhaps it was the other way round. The tug gave a few wee toots on its air horn and nuzzled in closer to the enormous cruiser. Ray hoped she hadn't said anything drunken and foolish to Perdita about her pregnancy last night. She didn't think she had, but then another memory landed rudely in her mind, and she winced in self-reproach. She'd got a bee in her bonnet about the singer's funny-looking thumb. Bloody hell. She hadn't shut up about it. Perdita couldn't see what Ray was talking about, but instead of dropping the subject, Ray had carried on relentlessly, pointing at it, going on and on, about how everyone seemed to have a fucking malformed thumb these days, and what the hell was wrong with the world. She sighed. This cluster didn't have many sessions left. She'd better get on with some adjustments. Simple, quick adjustments that were easy to report. She accessed the blueprints of the ship and a holographic map projected up from her eyeline. She studied it, considering where to go next. Part of a deck occupied by passenger quarters flashed with an alarm. Ray zoomed in. Deck 77. She saw a couple of lounges, a small cinema, and, where the alert pulsed red, a chapel. The decision was made. Any religious activity in metastasis was a good bet. Simulations often threw in a belief system, and they could generate some decent material for adjustments. It was depressingly predictable. A few elevators and high-speed walkways later, and Ray reached the zone where the alarm had been triggered. A lounge with tall pot plants and groups of leather armchairs waiting for passengers to sit in them and declare their opinions with aplomb. Members of a wedding congregation had crowded in one area. Some folks sat perched on the padded arms of the chairs. Others fretted at the edge of the coffee table or just stood nearby, wondering where to put their hands. Everyone's attention revolved around the bride. Ray guessed there'd been a major setback with the wedding. Faces looked grave. But the bride remained stoic and dried-eyed. She'd spent far too much time and money on her makeup to indulge in the screaming habdabs. The spa drones hadn't pampered and rejuvenated her and the bridal party for nothing. So she sat without expression, as if paused, waiting for her meticulously planned wedding to get back on schedule and for reality to re-engage once again. "Hello," said Ray as she approached the group. "I'm with the ship's events management team. What's the problem?" Well, at last, a middle-aged man untangled himself from a conference with his wife. "Let me tell you what the problem is. We organised this over a year ago. We paid for the licence fee and the drop anchor at sea package, and they assured us it would include a non-denominational officiant to perform the ceremony." It must have been the bride's father. Now, he adjusted his Demetriorite jacket accusingly. "It surprised us to find that the officiant was not, in fact, non-denominational. As an Anglican chaplain, he is clearly of denomination. But we didn't make a fuss. No, we did not." He looked to his wife for confirmation, who was sharper than usual today, and agreed at once. "Now, everybody knows Anglicans are a drab lot, and you'd think you'd know where you were." There was a murmur of agreement. "I mean, if it weren't for the outfit, you wouldn't even call it a religion." More agreement. "So you can imagine our astonishment when we got lumped with that Burke in there." He jabbed a thumb towards the double doors at the end of the lounge. The frosted glass windows had Lotus Chapel inscribed on them. "He's gone to bloody pieces, and I want to know what you're going to do about it." Ray adopted a professional and humble disposition. "I hope you can accept my sincerest apologies, sir. Rest assured we'll resolve this matter and the happy couple will drop anchor at sea in no time. I just need a quick word with the chaplain, then we'll get this show on the road. Perhaps we can discuss reimbursement for the inconvenience later." The father of the bride gave a curt nod, and Ray headed straight for the chapel. A disgruntled huddle of men had gathered around the dedication gazebo, penning the chaplain in so he couldn't escape. The men muttered amongst themselves while keeping this pathetic figure in their periphery, ready to pounce at the smallest provocation. "Thank you for your help, gentlemen," said Ray, breezing through them. "You've been invaluable. Now, if you'd give the chaplain and I some time alone, I'm sure we can sort this out with little fuss." The men hesitated. After casting a few more suspicious glances at him, they left, quietly glad they could bugger off and find a drink. The chaplain dabbed his brow and sank into the love seat in the middle of the gazebo. He was in a bad way, harassed and anxious, twitchy with concern. "So, what's the fucking problem then, Your Grace?" The chaplain spluttered straight into an explanation. "I can't do this anymore. I'm serious. I can't do this. It's gone too far. I had fun, yeah, I'll say it." He stared at her, wide-eyed. "I'm only human. Don't see why it's such a crime. Why am I the bad guy here? I'm not the bad guy. I was just... It's not fun anymore." He looked down at his feet. "I want to go home." Why couldn't she have got a simple adjustment? Something easy, without all the dramatics. "Right," Ray said, resigning herself. "Let's take this one step at a time, shall we? What was fun?" "I watched That's all. I just watched. I didn't join in. Not a crime, is it? Ray had a notion where this conversation was leading. It was all a bit tacky. She sighed and encouraged him to get on with it. It's a long trip. My wife's at home, the months drag on, and I just started frequenting the Calypso poolside bar and grill. Not much for me to do on these cruises. A few weddings, some old couples renewing their vows. I was bored. The Calypso is a lovely spot, out in the open air, smashing pina coladas, and, well, yes, there's all the sunbathers. Here we go, thought Ray. All those bodies, those big women basking right there in front of you, acres of oily, sweaty flesh laid out on the deck. All those bumps and nooks and crannies on display. No shame whatsoever. Of course, I didn't do anything. I wouldn't. Sure, I watched. Not a crime, is it? I want to go home. Okay, sure. I get the picture. Ray wondered why the simulations always had the pervs in the clergy. Look, I'm not here to judge you, Your Holiness. I just want to clear this mess up. So, you like watching fat women get sunburnt? Fine. But these guys need to get married. What's your beef? Well, one thing leads to another, you know. She didn't, but nodded anyway. You hear rumours on a boat like this. All these strangers, all on holiday, all having fun. The booze, the drugs, the partying. You hear rumours, I guess. I just wondered if the gossip was true. And you know what? He leaned forwards and lowered his voice. It is. Dirty buggers. They're all at it, can't help themselves. Of course, I didn't do anything, you understand? I wouldn't. I love my wife. Lucky woman. I watch sometimes. I enjoy watching. They think I'm dressed up. He looked at the vestments he was wearing. They don't realise I'm actually the ship's chaplain. But I swear, I didn't touch anyone. I wouldn't. I love my wife, you know. So he said. He looked towards the chapel doors. So when she came in to get married, I couldn't believe my eyes. He lowered his voice to a whisper. Last time I saw her, she was on all fours, harness clamped in her mouth and a plume of horsehair plugged in her arse. She was whinnying. Right. Are you sure it was her? Sure enough. Okay, the lighting was dim and I was pretty wasted, but I watched her for ages. Wasted? Oh, the drugs here are 5-star. Haven't you tried them? Ray shook her head. Oh, well, I enjoy them. I see. And what have we had today, Your Reverence? He seemed to think this an odd question. Haven't a clue, my dear. All sorts, I suppose. He cast his mind back. I'm not as wobbly as yesterday. Jesus, could barely get out of my cabin. And I'm not nearly as dancey and singy as the day before. That was fun. But I've seen a lot of odd stuff this morning. If I told you what your hair was doing right now, you'd be amazed. Embarrassed, too, I shouldn't wonder. Ray resisted the urge to touch her hair. She'd had enough. So let's get this straight. You can't do the wedding because you're off your trolley. And because of the horsey bride sex slave. And her too, yes. And now everyone's dressed up, with no wedding to go to, and they want to skin you alive. I can't tell you what a downer it's been. Bad enough being threatened, but when you're off your face, there really is nothing grimmer. I want to go home now, if that's okay. I do love my wife, you know. Don't worry, Your Holiness. I'll take over from here. You get back to your cabin, and I'll sort this out. Just do me a favour, and don't speak to anyone. How's that sound? Super, he said. Peachy. The order of ceremony and the vows are up on the podium. He pointed to the hollow screen on the altar of unity. It's self-explanatory. Just make sure you say Amen now and then. They love it. Ray stepped aside and let the chaplain out. He looked at her hair, stifled a giggle, and rushed off, avoiding eye contact with the congregation. Everyone was back and seated in their pews soon enough. Ray explained that the chaplain had been unwell, alluding to an unfortunate mental illness, and reassured them that she was qualified to drop anchor at sea for the beautiful couple. Up at the podium, Ray scrolled the order of ceremony back a page and carried on with the service. On her cue, the bride and groom looked into each other's eyes and spoke their vows together. The eagle is freedom, born of true love. I am one wing, and you are equally the other. Let us fly in harmony, and may gentle winds carry us all the way to heaven. The river is life, flowing from true love. My depths are yours, and yours are mine. Let us swim in synchrony, and may warm currents carry us all the way to heaven. The meadow is fertile, bearing the fruit of true love. Its bounty is yours, and its plenty is mine. Let us gallop in unity, and may tender hooves carry us all the way to heaven. At this last line, Ray thought she caught an extra sparkle in the couple's eyes. Looking around, she saw several members of the congregation exchanging knowing looks too. She chose not to dwell on it and forged ahead. Not far away, in an open-aired piazza, Ray found a table to sit at. It was a popular part of the ship that hummed with the chatter of passengers sampling the rainbow gifts of the ice cream stall, supping frosted lagers at the bar, or simply lounging about stirring frothy cups of coffee at the tables near the fountain. A pale-skinned pianist flared his nostrils as he played Chopin on a grand piano. Ray thought she caught the discordant twang of some notes falling distinctly wide of the mark, and something erratic about the tempo he was keeping. As she had a moment, she was compiling the briefest of reports. She'd still have a hangover when she extracted herself from metastasis, so it'd be easier to do it now in the sim. The report was a facsimile of hundreds of others she'd filed over the years. With the template projecting up from her eyeline, she changed a few of the names and dates and tweaked some of the neurological adjustments. It was hardly what you'd call thorough, but it'd have to do. Yeah. Quite a toxic bunch, I agree. Ray jumped, startled. She hadn't noticed the man stood right behind her. He was leaning over her shoulder, reading her report. It was the pianist. He pointed at a line of the report. But there's only one R in floridly. He'd stopped playing the piano and approached Ray without her noticing. And you see here where you've marked the incident as a 3 on the severity scale. He pointed to a graph on the holographic form. Well, that's wrong. It needs to be more than just threatening to classify it as a 3. You should either correct that or go back and amend your description. Excuse me? Ray was genuinely surprised. She knew that elements of a cluster's unconscious could become aware of the metastatic intervention. But she hadn't realised this could manifest so literally. Such self-awareness was normally represented obliquely. It took her aback. The pianist pulled up a seat next to her, reached over to her holographic projection, and flicked back a few pages through her report. Yes, some disturbing sexual stuff sloshing about this group. That chaplain was a bad sign. Enmeshed sexual dynamics like that are always bad news. He flicked over a few more pages. And this was your adjustment? He looked at her with disappointment. Band-aid on a broken leg, no? Yes, it was. I'm pushed for time. It seemed expedient. She felt herself getting defensive and immediately felt ridiculous. She had to make use of this archetype, not get drawn into a discussion. Okay, so what would you have done? Priestly archetypes like that ought to unite the feminine and masculine. It should help balance the cluster's lustiness and utilise it for the good of the group. A decent panmotech ought to work on him, rather than just stitch the whole scenario up with a quick wedding. Sober him up. Get him in touch with his religious values again. Help him challenge the cluster's immorality. Then again, he peered at her from under his brow. Yes. Well, then again, you could just fuck it off and leave them to it. Probably go and find a bar somewhere. You in? Yeah, said Ray. Good point. Well made. On their way out, she offered her hand to introduce herself. My name's Ray, she said. He took it firmly. Yeah, I know. Glancing down at their clasped hands, she noticed he had a peculiarly unique deformity. Nestled in the crook of her hand was his unmistakably cloven thumb.